Hey, Jan, just a quick follow-up on inflation. So we're looking at Labor Department data. It shows that there is like a 0.9% decline in how much Americans have earned per hour on average this August versus last year. So year-over-year data when you adjust it for inflation. And so inflation is clearly eating into people's paychecks. And I understand that you're saying that, and you have said this in the past, that impact from inflation is transitory, that the president will, when asked how he plans to address this, we'll talk about competition issues, we'll talk about meat prices. But are there any sort of near-term steps that the White House is now thinking of taking as you look at this data that is starting to flow in? And is the president starting to get increasingly concerned, perhaps, that this is now starting to actually eat into people's paychecks?
Well, as you picked that wages piece of data, though, I think what's important to note is that the progress that the president talked about this morning is on a range of fronts, which is also important. We're at a faster projection of economic growth than we were at a year ago, far and away. The 4.8% unemployment rate is down from 6.3% in January. Unemployment claims are down 60% since the president took office. We have seen close to 5 million jobs created since President Biden took office, and wages actually went up month to month from last month to the prior month. So that's all important data. I understand we can cherry pick different data pieces from a year ago or 2 years ago, but what we're seeing in the trend is encouraging and is progress being made. As you well know, inflation is the purview of the Federal Reserve. They make projections. We rely on those projections. Those continue to say that it's transitory and will come down next year. It is also important that we address this over the long term and we address the costs. That is really what we're talking about in terms of the impact on the American people. People may not know. You hear inflation, it's like, what does that mean? That means rising costs, right? And how do you address those costs? And what the president's trying to do with his economic agenda is do exactly that. Cut the costs for the American people, child care, elder care, cut in half the child poverty, make sure that people have some breathing room. That's really what he's focused on doing in terms of how it's impacting people who are sitting at home worried about their economic future.
Are there specific, perhaps, commodities? You spoke about chips. We've been talking about chips for a long time. Are there specific commodities or specific bottlenecks in the global supply chain that are perhaps emerging more than ever now, in the run-up to the holidays that the White House is particularly focused on?
Well, I've talked about a couple of the areas where we are quite focused on doing more and ensuring we're doing more, including addressing ports and transportation bottlenecks, which, as we know, can impact a lot of different areas because it is how goods are moved and transported and ensuring there aren't the delays that I think you all have reported on in a range of ways. And John Porcari is somebody who has a great deal of experience, having worked for the Department of Transportation in the past, and is working to address those global transportation issues. I noted, of course, the semiconductor shortage, which, as you know, impacts a number of industries here. And we have made some progress in our view, including improving communications and trust across the supply chain, improvements in the supply chain practices, which may seem overly simplistic or just cutting through bureaucratic red tape, but it can help the process and move things forward. I also noted food processing. This is an area also where we have seen impacts in some communities from food processing and issues in the global supply chain. And so we know that the pandemic has revealed vulnerabilities in our food system. That's one of the reasons the Department of Agriculture announced the new food supply chain loan guarantee program. And we've also seen, as it relates to lumber, which was an area that we talked about quite a bit several months ago, and we saw the impact on how that impacted housing prices of new homes specifically. Since its peak, the cost of lumber has decreased by 60%, and is one example of the market leveling off. So point is, there are different, as you know, there are different issues as it relates to the supply chain in different industries. We're working to address them and attack them all at the same time. We have seen some elements of progress, but we also continue to understand and know that as we're coming back from a global pandemic, a massive undertaking, and the economy's turning back on, we're going to have to keep pressing to make sure we're addressing these issues, and we're doing that around the clock at agencies across the federal government.
Thank you. And then just one quick question on gas prices. Reuters has some reporting that shows a lot of American consumers we're talking to have started to link the rise in gas prices to the administration's policies that ban fossil fuels. For example, a pause on federal leasing on land and water. And so my question is, why keep a lid on production at home with American companies and instead ask OPEC for more production where that production is perhaps not as environmentally regulated? Is there any consideration perhaps being given to this, keeping in mind rising gas prices?
Well, we are in touch. We are not a member of OPEC, as you all know. We are in regular touch with OPEC, and we have also raised issues of supply in meetings that members of our national security team and others have had in recent weeks, as I have confirmed from here. We, of course, want to address the short-term supply issues. One of those issues, as we know, was related to Hurricane Ida and the impacts in the region, which we took steps to address certainly at the time. But our view, to go back to your original question, is also that, while we need to take steps to address short-term supply issues, we need to also keep our eye on the long term and the impact of the climate, the crisis that we are in the middle of, and ensure that we are continuing to encourage the production and rise of renewables and the clean energy industry, which is exactly what the President's proposals would do. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen.